Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed at 1,000 subscribers. I'll be posting a special video. I'm Mark 34, and my hand was already in her tote. I was looking for the car key, nothing heroic. A folded clinic statement slid out and stuck to my palm. It had her name on it, and my stomach dropped hard. I tried to tuck it back like I never saw it. My thumb caught the bold line near the top. Pregnancy termination jumped off the page like a slap. I froze with that paper half in the bag. You know that stupid moment when your brain plays dumb? Mine did that fast and desperate. I told myself it was a mistake or spam or anything. Then I saw the date and my lungs went tight. Footsteps hit the hallway and I folded it wrong. It crinkled loud like it wanted attention. Kayla came in chewing on a piece of toast. Her eyes went straight to my hand and stayed there. "What's that?" Her voice sounded too careful. I shoved it behind my thigh and smiled like an idiot. "Nothing, just a flyer." My mouth moved before my brain. Her stare didn't blink and my smile started to shake. She stepped closer and held her hand out. Not grabbing, just waiting like she had time. I didn't give it to her, which told her everything. Her jaw tightened and she turned toward the sink. I followed her, still gripping the paper. "Why are you going through my stuff?" she snapped. That hit me wrong because I was holding a grenade. I heard myself answer with a laugh that wasn't real. "I was looking for the key." I lifted my empty hand. She pointed at the counter without looking at me. "It's right there, you always do this." That last part landed like a prepared line. I slid the statement into my hoodie pocket. The move felt slick, like I was the one hiding secrets. Kayla watched the pocket, then looked at my face. Her eyes had that hard shine people get before a fight. I tried to take control because panic hates silence. "So what is this?" I tapped my chest once. She didn't ask what it said, and that scared me more. She just whispered, "Not here," like someone might hear us. We weren't in public, which made it worse. I lowered my voice anyway because my body listened. "Did you go to a clinic?" I asked it straight. Her shoulders lifted a fraction, then dropped again. Kayla reached for a glass and missed it. It clinked against the counter and she swore under her breath. I should have helped, but I stayed planted like a coward. That small miss felt like proof of a bigger truth. "I don't want kids, you know that." The words came out sharp. I regretted the tone the second I heard it. She flinched and her hand curled around the glass too hard. Her eyes watered, but she refused to wipe them. "Stop saying it like I trapped you." She finally faced me. I wanted to say I wasn't trapped, I was blindsided. Instead, I asked the question that cut us in half. "Were you pregnant?" Kayla didn't answer, and that was an answer. She shook her head once, then shook it again harder. Like she could shake the truth loose and drop it. I stood there waiting, and the room felt smaller. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ignored it. Everything in me narrowed to her breathing. She swallowed, then whispered, "I handled it." The way she said handled made my skin crawl. I pulled the statement out and flattened it on the table. My finger traced the line item like it could explain itself. Kayla stared at the paper like it was a weapon. Then she looked up and asked, "Are you going to leave?" I grabbed my keys and walked out before I could soften. Kayla followed me to the door and stopped short. Her fingers hovered near my sleeve, then pulled back. "Don't," slipped out like a warning, and I kept moving. In the car, my hands wouldn't settle on the wheel. I pulled the statement out and read every line again. The clinic name sat there like it owned my life. I typed it into my phone, then hesitated over search. I didn't want proof, I wanted the opposite of proof. Still, I hit call on the number listed below. A recorded voice thanked me, then asked for an extension. I hung up mid-sentence because my chest felt loud. I tried the insurance number next because I'm stubborn. A menu asked me to press 1 and I slammed buttons. When a person finally answered, my voice went fake calm. "I need to confirm a claim," and my tongue went dry. The rep asked for my wife's date of birth. I gave it, then hated myself for knowing it. A pause crackled through the line, then the wall went up. Privacy rules, and my face got hot in the car. I pushed anyway because I'm not proud like that. "Is there a claim at least, yes or no?" Another pause, then a softer tone like pity. I can't confirm anything, and that felt like confirmation. I pulled into a lot and stared at nothing. You ever catch yourself bargaining with a stranger on a phone? I tried one more angle, like a guy on a bad date. What if she's in danger, and even I heard the cheap move? The rep didn't bite. She offered a generic hotline number and ended it clean. I saw T there holding my phone like it betrayed me. Then my screen lit up with a text from Kayla. I can explain, please come home. No details, just that neat little plea. I typed back 3 different answers and erased them all. Finally, I wrote, "Where did you go?" and hit send. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. A minute passed, then another. I watched the dots play dead like a coward's heartbeat. My phone stayed quiet and my jaw started to ache. I drove toward the clinic address without thinking it through. That's the ugly truth, I wanted to see the place. I wanted the building to tell me it was wrong. Instead, I found it, and it looked normal enough to hurt. I walked in like I belonged there, which felt disgusting. A receptionist looked up and smiled, then noticed my face. "What can I help you with?" Her voice stayed professional. I slid the statement halfway onto the counter and waited. Her eyes flicked over it fast, then back to me. She didn't look shocked, that part stuck in my throat. "I'm her husband," I tried, like that should unlock doors. She reached for a clipboard and didn't touch the paper. "We can't discuss patient visits," the line came out practiced. I leaned closer before I could stop myself. "I'm not asking for details," I lied because I was. She pushed the clipboard toward me anyway, blank and useless. I signed nothing, I couldn't even hold the pen right. "What if she's hurt?" I asked and heard my voice shake. The receptionist's eyes softened for half a second. Then they hardened again, and I knew I was done. She slid a brochure across the counter and withdrew her hand. A silent peace offering, a polite shove. "Give this to her," she murmured like she'd done it before. My fingers closed on the paper, and it felt like defeat. Outside, I stood by my car and read the brochure once. It listed follow-up care, warning signs, and an after-hours line. That line punched me harder than the bill ever did. Because it meant this wasn't theoretical, it already happened. I called Kayla again and let it ring longer. When it went to voicemail, I didn't leave a message. I just listened to her cheerful recording, then ended the call. My next move felt obvious, and I hated that too. I drove to my office and parked like it was normal. I walked in, sat down, and opened our shared bank app. The charge was there, split into 2 payments. One was mine, and I didn't remember authorizing it. My mouth went sour as I scrolled. The payment had a memo, just a string of numbers. I snapped a screenshot, then deleted it, then took it again. I kept acting like hiding evidence would fix anything. A coworker stopped by and asked if I was sick. I nodded because that was easier than the truth. He offered lunch and I waved him off too fast. As he walked away, I realized I was alone on purpose. I left early and drove home with my headlights on. Kayla's car was in the driveway, and mine felt heavier. I sat there watching the front door like it might bite. Then my phone buzzed again, and the sender made me swear. It was Jess. "Don't do anything stupid," the message read. No greeting, no context, just that blunt warning. And suddenly I knew this story had more people in it. I walked in and held up my phone like evidence. Jess's message sat on the screen, bright and blunt. Kayla's head snapped toward it, then away fast. Her mouth opened and nothing came out. "What did you tell her?" I kept my voice low. Kayla rubbed her palms on her jeans once, twice. "That's none of her business," came out clipped and thin. My grip tightened until my knuckles ached. I moved closer and she backed up a step. Not a big step, just enough to feel it. "That's not an answer," I pushed and hated my tone. Her eyes darted to the hallway like there was an exit. "You went to the clinic," I said it straight. Kayla flinched at the word like it stung. "I took care of it," she shot back, fast and defensive. Then her face changed like she regretted the speed. I pulled the statement out and set it down. Not gently, not dramatic, just final. Kayla stared at it like it might start talking. Her hands hovered over it, then stopped in midair. "You used our account," I said, and my throat pinched. Kayla's shoulders rose, then dropped like she got smaller. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. That whisper felt like a door closing. I leaned on the counter to keep steady. My mind kept sprinting ahead of my body. Were you pregnant? I asked, and the silence answered first. Kayla blinked hard and looked at the floor. She nodded once, tiny and stubborn. My stomach didn't drop this time, it stayed clenched. How long? I asked and heard my own voice shake. Kayla pressed her lips together like she was counting. A few weeks, she said and swallowed after. My mouth went dry like I'd been chewing dust. You knew for weeks, I snapped and instantly regretted it. Kayla's eyes flashed, then then went flat. Don't act like you would have been calm, she fired back. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them, restless. You've made it so clear, she added, and her voice cracked. I felt accused, and part of me knew why. I tried to slow down before I turned cruel. Clear isn't the same as cruel, I muttered. Kayla gave a laugh that sounded like pain. Sometimes it is, she said and looked right at me. I wanted to argue because that's my reflex. But the memory of my own words kept rising up. Not the exact words, just the sharp edge of them. It made my tongue feel too big for my mouth. Tell me what happened, I said and forced the volume down. Kayla stared at the wall like it might help. Then she pointed at the table, a small command. Sit, she said, and it felt like an order. I sat because standing made me feel like a threat. Kayla stayed on her feet a second longer. She inhaled, then exhaled like she was bracing for impact. Then she sat across from me and didn't look away. I took a test, she started, and her fingers twisted together. I nodded once like I could handle facts. It was positive, she added, and her eyes flicked to mine. My face didn't move, and that scared me. When were you going to tell me? I asked. Kayla's jaw tightened like she bit down on anger. I wasn't, she said, and the honesty hit harder. She watched my reaction like she expected an explosion. Why? I pushed and my voice came out rough. Kayla's hands went to her stomach, then dropped quickly. Because I know you, she snapped, then stopped herself. Her breath hitched and her eyes went shiny again. I'm not a monster, I said, and it sounded weak. Kayla nodded fast like she agreed in theory. Then stop making me feel like I'm one, she shot back. That line landed and didn't bounce. I stared at the statement again to keep from staring at her. Numbers, dates, codes, all neat, all cold. You didn't think I deserved a heads up? I asked. Kayla's nails tapped the table twice, then stopped. I thought you'd leave, she admitted, voice tight. I shook my head, automatic denial. Kayla leaned forward and didn't blink. Would you have stayed? She asked and held my gaze. I opened my mouth and stalled out. Because the truth was complicated and ugly. I didn't want kids and I never hid that. But staying with her felt different than staying with a pregnancy. You see, Kayla whispered and leaned back again. That one word made me feel caught. I hated that she was right about my hesitation. And I hated that she used it like a weapon. I would have talked, I tried, and my voice faltered. Kayla's lips curled like she'd heard it before. We've talked, she said, and her eyes went hard. Then she added, you don't listen when you're scared. That stung because it felt true. I wanted to defend myself, and I did anyway. I'm scared now and I'm listening, I insisted. Kayla's face didn't soften, and that scared me more. Jess drove me, Kayla said suddenly. The name snapped the room tighter. I held my phone up again, the text still there. So she knows everything, I said, and my voice sharpened. Kayla flinched, then nodded. She was the only person I could call, she said. My laugh came out short and bitter. You couldn't call your husband, I threw back and regretted it. Kayla's eyes watered again, but she stayed steady. I didn't feel safe to, she said, and my chest squeezed. I wanted to reject that word safe like it was unfair. But I also knew I'd earned pieces of it. You're saying I'm dangerous, I said, and heard the panic. Kayla shook her head once, careful. Not physically, she said quickly, then paused. Emotionally, she added, and let it hang. That pause made my stomach twist. I stared down at my hands like they belonged to someone else. Okay, I forced out, and it sounded like surrender. Kayla's eyes widened like she didn't expect that. I'm not trying to win, I said, then stopped. Because I was still trying to win, just quieter. I'm trying to understand the timeline, I corrected. Kayla nodded and her throat bobbed. I found out, she began, then cut herself off. Her fingers pressed against her temple, like she was steadying herself. I took the test at work, she admitted, barely audible. That detail made it real in a new way. Then what? I asked and kept my hands flat. Kayla's eyes flicked to the hallway again. I called Jess, she said, then swallowed. She came fast, she added, and my jaw tightened. You didn't even call me after, I said. Kayla's nostrils flared, angry now. After what? She snapped, then caught herself. After I panicked, she finished, quieter, and looked away. I felt a surge of something that wasn't just anger. It was grief, but it felt ridiculous to call it that. Because I didn't want a baby, and I'd been loud about it. Yet my chest still hurt like something was taken. You didn't tell me you were late, I said and shook my head. Kayla shrugged, small and sharp. You don't ask, she fired back, then paused. And I didn't want you to start, she added, eyes flashing. That line hit a nerve. Start what? I asked, though I knew. Kayla stared me down and didn't blink. Making it about you, she said, and the accusation hung. I sat back and tried not to react. My knee bounced under the table like it had its own panic. I'm making it about us, I said and heard the plea. Kayla's lips pressed together like she was holding back a scream. You set the rule, she said, voice low and steady. No kids ever, that was the deal. Hearing it framed like a contract made me feel sick. Because it was true, and it sounded awful out loud. I didn't force you to stay, I shot back. Kayla nodded slowly, like she expected that exact line. No, she agreed, and her eyes went wet again. You just made the alternative feel like falling off a cliff. I stared at her because what do you say to that? My mouth moved, then stopped, then moved again. I never wanted you to feel trapped, I managed. Kayla's laugh came out shaky, not amused. And yet, she said and wiped her cheek fast. She did it like she hated needing to. I watched her thumb tremble and felt my own throat tighten. Then she leaned forward again, like she had to finish. I booked it, she said, and her voice got small. Jess took the day off, she waited with me. I squeezed my eyes shut for 1 second. The picture formed anyway, and it wouldn't leave. Did you hear anything? I asked, then hated myself. Kayla stiffened and her face went blank. No, she said too fast and stared at the table. That speed told me I hit something raw. I lifted a hand, palm up, trying to pull it back. Forget I asked, I said, and my voice cracked. Kayla's shoulders sagged like she'd been holding a weight. Then she nodded once and kept staring down. We sat in silence that felt loud. My phone buzzed again and I didn't even look. Kayla glanced at the sound, then away. It felt like a third person in the room. I didn't want to hurt you, Kayla said finally. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. You did, I answered, honest and flat. Kayla flinched like she deserved it, and that made it worse. I know, she whispered, and her hands shook. I watched them shake and felt my anger twist into guilt. Then my anger snapped back because guilt didn't fix betrayal. My brain kept seesawing and I hated the ride. Why delete me from it? I asked and my voice rose. Kayla's eyes sharpened again, defensive returning. Because you would have tried to talk me out of it, she snapped. And I couldn't survive that conversation, she added, almost pleading. I shook my head hard. I wouldn't control you, I said, then heard the lie. Maybe I wouldn't forbid, but I would persuade. And persuasion can be a cage when you're scared. Kayla watched my face like she saw the truth land. You get it, she whispered and sounded exhausted. I didn't answer because getting it felt like losing. Then she reached across the table and stopped short. Her hand hovered near mine and froze. She pulled back like she touched heat. Do you hate me? She asked, eyes wide and raw. I stared at her hand, withdrawing, and couldn't find words. I looked away and grabbed my phone instead. Jess's warning still sat there like a dare. I typed, what do you know, then paused. Because sending it would change everything. Kayla saw my screen and lunged forward. Not violent, just sudden and desperate. Don't drag her deeper, she snapped and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were cold and the contact jolted me. I pulled my hand back slower than I wanted. We're already in it, I said, and my voice went hard. Kayla shook her head fast, panic breaking through. Please, she whispered, and her eyes begged without pride. That please made me hesitate again. I hate admitting that, but it did. I set the phone down, face up like a truce. Then I tapped the statement with one finger. Tell me one thing, I said and kept my voice even. Kayla nodded, tense like a wire. Were you ever going to tell me later? I asked. Her silence stretched and the answer formed in her eyes. Before she could speak, the doorbell rang. Kayla jerked like someone hit her. I stood up without thinking, heart racing. And Kayla whispered one word that made my blood run cold: Jess. The doorbell hit again, sharp and impatient. Kayla grabbed my forearm like she could stop time. Her nails dug in, then she let go fast. Let me handle it, she breathed and her voice shook. I moved anyway because control is my bad habit. Kayla stepped in front of me, blocking the hallway. Her palms went up like a traffic cop. My chest tightened because I knew who stood outside. I opened the door and Jess was already leaning forward. She took one look at my face and her jaw set. She didn't ask to come in, she just stepped over the threshold. Kayla's breath caught behind me, like she lost the last inch. Jess pointed at Kayla without looking away from me. Are you okay? Her tone stayed firm. Kayla nodded too quickly, then swallowed hard. Jess's eyes slid to me and didn't soften. Why are you here? I asked, and hated how cold it sounded. Jess kicked the door shut with her heel. Because you're spiraling, she snapped, then checked Kayla again. My face went hot because she wasn't wrong. Kayla tried to squeeze between us and failed. Jess shifted her stance and created space for her. It was protective, like an instinct. Seeing that made my stomach twist in a new way. We're having a private talk, I said, too controlled. Jess didn't blink, she didn't even pretend to care. Private doesn't mean safe, she shot back and kept her eyes on Kayla. Kayla's shoulders hunched like she expected a hit. I held up my hands and forced a slow breath. No one is in danger, I said and meant it. Jess's mouth tightened like she'd heard that line before. Kayla stared at the floor, which made the room feel worse. Jess stepped closer to the table and spotted the bill. Her gaze flicked over it and she exhaled through her nose. So you found it, she muttered, and the words sounded bitter. Kayla winced like Jess just betrayed her. You knew, I said, and my voice came out rough. Jess nodded once, then glanced at Kayla for permission. Kayla gave a tiny shake of her head. Jess ignored it, and that scared me more than anger. She didn't want you to know, Jess said, plain and brutal. I wanted to argue, but my mouth felt glued shut. Kayla's eyes flashed at Jess, furious and pleading at once. Jess lifted her chin, like she'd decided to be the villain today. Kayla took a step forward and jabbed a finger at Jess. Stop, her voice cracked on the word. Jess's expression softened for half a beat, then hardened again. Kayla's hand fell and she looked smaller in the doorway. I turned to Kayla and tried to keep my voice steady. Did you tell her everything? I asked. Kayla hesitated, then nodded once, ashamed. That nod felt like a door slamming in my face. Jess shifted her weight like she was ready for a fight. She told me enough, Jess said and crossed her arms. She was terrified, the word terrified hung in the air. Kayla's eyes squeezed shut, like she couldn't stand hearing it aloud. I snapped because I hate being painted as a threat. Terrified of what? I asked, too sharp. Jess didn't raise her voice, that made it worse. Of losing you, she said and stared me down. I tried to laugh it off and failed. That's ridiculous, I said and my voice wobbled. Jess tilted her head, almost curious. Is it? She asked and waited like she had receipts. Kayla suddenly shoved past us toward the hallway. Jess reached out, then stopped herself. Kayla paused halfway and looked back with wet eyes. Don't do this, she whispered and her voice sounded thin. Jess followed 2 steps and kept her hands visible. I'm not here to hurt you, she said, softer now. Kayla shook her head and leaned against the wall. The way she leaned looked like surrender, and it hit me hard. I stepped in front of Jess without thinking. You don't get to run my marriage, I said and tasted the bitterness. Jess's eyes narrowed, her voice dropped low. Then stop making her handle everything alone, she snapped. Kayla slid down the wall until she was sitting. Not dramatic, not for attention, just done. My feet moved, then stopped because I didn't know what to do. Jess looked at me like she dared me to leave her there. I crouched near Kayla and kept my hands to myself. Do you want water? I asked, stupid and small. Kayla let out a shaky breath and didn't answer. Jess answered for her, which stung like a slap. She needs space, Jess said, firm. Kayla's eyes lifted to mine, and there was something raw there. It wasn't anger now, it was disappointment. That look made my throat tighten in a way I didn't expect. I stood up and backed away because I didn't trust myself. Jess followed me into the kitchen like a guard. You don't get to corner her, Jess warned low and fast. Hearing corner made my chest flare with defensive heat. I'm not cornering anyone, I said and forced my jaw loose. Jess leaned closer, voice calm but sharp. You're doing it anyway, she tapped her own chest once. Your rules take up all the air, she added and didn't blink. I gripped the counter hard and stared at my knuckles. Rules, that word made me feel gross like a tyrant. I told myself I was just being honest from day one. Yet my honesty looked ugly in her mouth. You keep calling it rules, I shot back. Jess shrugged, unimpressed. Call it whatever helps you sleep, she said. Kayla called it a trap, she added, and I felt my stomach drop. Kayla's voice floated from the hallway, shaky and quiet. Jess, one word like a plea. Jess did. Turn around, she kept her eyes on me. You want the truth, Jess said, and pointed toward Kayla with her chin. I swallowed hard and nodded once. Jess's mouth tightened like she hated doing this. She wrote you messages, Jess said, a lot of them. Then she deleted them, she added, and my skin prickled. I tried to deny it because denial is easy. She could have told me, I said, stubborn. Jess let out a small laugh with no humor. She tried, Jess said, and her eyes flashed with frustration. Kayla stood in the hallway, hugging her own ribs. She looked like she was bracing for a cold wind. I opened my mouth to call her name, then stopped. Jess cut in before I could soften the moment. She stood in my car and shook, Jess said, clipped. She kept saying you'd walk out. I wanted to say I wouldn't, but the words stuck. Because I couldn't prove it, and she knew that. I lifted both hands, palms out. I never threatened her, I said, and believed it. Jess's eyebrows rose, like she'd heard this exact defense before. You don't have to threaten, she said, and her tone stayed flat. That hit me in the chest. Because I knew what she meant, even if I hated it. When you repeat something long enough, it becomes a wall. Kayla was living behind that wall, and I helped build it. Kayla took a step toward us, then stopped. Her eyes flicked between us like she was watching a wreck. I don't want you two fighting, she whispered. Jess finally turned to her and her face softened. We're not fighting, Jess lied, gentle. Kayla gave a weak half smile that didn't last. Her hand went to her mouth like she might gag. I moved forward again, and she recoiled by inches. Jess shot me a look that made me freeze. Kayla noticed, and something in her face hardened. Stop treating him like he's going to hit me, Kayla snapped. Her voice shook with anger and her cheeks flushed. Jess lifted her hands in surrender. I'm not saying that, Jess insisted, quick. Kayla stood taller, eyes blazing now. You're acting like it, she fired back, and her voice cut. I felt sick because both of them were right. Jess was guarding, and Kayla was tired of being guarded. And I was standing there like the reason. My mind kept reaching for a clean villain and finding none. Kayla walked into the kitchen and shoved the bill aside. Her fingers trembled as she did it. I did it, she said, voice tight, it's done. Jess nodded like she'd heard it 100 times. I stared at Kayla, trying to stay calm. You didn't even tell me you were pregnant, I said low. Kayla's eyes flashed, then dimmed fast. Because you made it clear what would happen, she whispered. Jess snapped her fingers once, sharp and impatient. Exactly, she said, and pointed at me like a prosecutor. You talk like love has conditions. The accusation landed, and my chest went tight. I have boundaries, I fired back too fast. Jess leaned back like she was watching a tantrum. Boundaries don't require secrecy, she said. Kayla flinched at secrecy, and her jaw clenched. Kayla crossed her arms and looked at the fridge door. I didn't want to debate, she muttered. I took a step closer and stopped myself mid-move. Why not, I asked, and my voice cracked. Kayla turned and met my eyes at last. Because you would have worn me down, she said, honest and brutal. Jess nodded like that settled it. I felt my face burn because part of me knew she was right. You think I would pressure you? I asked, and my voice shook. Kayla didn't answer with words, she answered by blinking hard. Then she whispered, "You already did," and looked away. That whisper hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. My mouth opened then closed. I wanted to argue the details because details feel safer. But her tone wasn't about details, it was about impact. And I hated that impact belonged to me now. Jess stepped between us again, calm but firm. "You need to step back," she said, and nodded toward the living room. I stared at her, then at Kayla. Kayla gave a tiny nod, like she agreed with Jess. That nod made me see red for a second. Not violent red, just humiliation. I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the garage. Jess called after me, and her voice stayed controlled. "Don't drive angry," she warned sharp. I didn't answer, I didn't trust my voice. My hands shook as I hit the button for the garage door. Behind me, Kayla whispered something I couldn't catch. I sat in my car and stared at the dashboard clock. My leg bounced like it wanted to run. I told myself to breathe, then forgot how. Then I opened the glove box without thinking. A small parking receipt slid out onto my lap. I didn't recognize it at first, then my brain clicked. It was dated the same day as the clinic charge. My throat tightened as I flipped it over. There was a signature on the back. Not Kayla's, not mine, not even Jess's handwriting. It was a name I had never seen in our life. And in that moment, the whole story cracked wider. I marched back inside with the receipt pinched between two fingers. My hand was shaking, and I hated that part most. Jess looked up from the couch like she expected a punchline. Kayla's eyes locked on the paper and went wide. I held it out, not close enough for her to snatch. "This name," I said, voice low, "who is it?" Kayla stared like the letters might rearrange themselves. Jess leaned forward and her face changed fast. Jess reached for it and I pulled back. "No," the word came out harsher than I meant. Jess lifted both hands and sat back, tight jaw. Kayla swallowed hard and didn't blink. "That's parking validation," Jess said, too quick. Kayla shot her a look that could cut glass. Jess stopped mid-sentence like she realized she overplayed it. I watched that little stumble and felt my gut twist. "So you know the name," I pressed, eyes on Jess. Jess's gaze slid to Kayla again, asking permission without words. Kayla shook her head once, firm and scared. Jess exhaled through her nose and stayed silent. Kayla stood up and wrapped her arms around herself. "Can we not do this?" she muttered, staring at the floor. I kept the receipt held up between us like a warning sign. "We are doing this," I said, and my voice didn't shake. Kayla's eyes flashed, then softened into something tired. "It's not what you think," she started, then stopped. That line always makes things worse, and she knew it. Jess looked away like she couldn't watch the crash. I took one step closer and forced myself to pause. "You told me Jess drove," I said, steady on purpose. Kayla's mouth opened, then closed again. Jess's shoulders rose like she was bracing for blame. Kayla pointed at Jess with a sharp motion. "She did drive," Kayla insisted, voice thin. I tapped the signature with my thumb. "Then why isn't this her name?" I asked and waited. Kayla's face went pale and her eyes got shiny. Jess sat up straight like she was done playing nice. "Because there was someone else," Jess snapped, then bit her tongue. Kayla spun toward her like Jess just lit a fuse. Kayla's voice jumped, "Jess, stop." Jess didn't back down, she leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You keep lying to him," Jess said hard. Kayla's breath hitched and her hands curled into fists. I felt the room tilt, like my balance had shifted. "So there was someone else," I said, slower now. Kayla stared at the wall like it might hide her. Jess nodded once, like she was sick of protecting secrets. Kayla lifted her chin and tried to hold her ground. "It doesn't matter," she said, but it came out weak. "It matters to me," I shot back, then regretted the edge. Kayla flinched anyway, and I hated myself for that. Jess stood up and stepped between us again. "Back up," she warned, palm out toward me. I did back up because I didn't want Kayla shrinking again. Jess glanced at Kayla and spoke softer, "Tell him." Kayla's throat moved like she was swallowing rocks. She walked to the kitchen and gripped the counter. Her knuckles went white, then pink, then white again. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "He's the driver," she whispered. I waited because that was not a name. Jess nodded like she already knew the next part. Kayla finally looked up, eyes wet. He's from my work. That hit different than a random driver. Work means time and time means access. My mind started building a story I didn't want. You're telling me a coworker took you? I asked, voice tight. Kayla nodded once, then shook her head like she hated it. I didn't want to call him, she said, fast and defensive. Jess was stuck, she added, and glanced at Jess like proof. Jess muttered I couldn't get away, and stared at the floor. I tried to connect the pieces without snapping them. So you called a coworker instead, I said, slow. Kayla rubbed her forehead like it hurt. Yes, she said, and her voice went small again. I held up the receipt. Why is his name on this? Kayla blinked hard, then looked down. He paid for parking, she admitted, barely audible. Jess added Kayla didn't have cash, and my jaw clenched. Cash, another detail that felt too real. I pictured Kayla standing there, shaking, asking for help. My anger wanted to sprint, but something else held it back. Who is he to you? I asked, and kept my hands still. Kayla's lips pressed together, stubborn and scared. Jess watched her like a coach watching someone choke. Kayla finally spoke, and the words came out clipped. He used to flirt, she said, and my stomach tightened again. You let him drive you to that? I said, voice low. Kayla's eyes flashed with anger now. I let him help, she snapped, then winced like she hurt herself. Jess stepped closer to Kayla, ready to steady her. I felt my face burn with jealousy I didn't ask for. I hated that emotion because it felt childish. But I also hated the image in my head. Did you sleep with him? I asked. Ked in the room went silent. Kayla's eyes went huge, then furious. No, she barked, and the force surprised even her. Jess shot me a look like I crossed a line. Kayla's hands shook as she pointed at me. How dare you? I deserved that, and I still needed the truth. I'm asking because you keep editing the story, I said, quieter. Kayla's eyes filled and her shoulders sank. Jess's voice cut in sharp. That baby was yours. Hearing Jess say it made my chest tighten. Kayla looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I stared at Kayla, waiting for her to deny it. She didn't deny it, and that was its own kind of pain. I sat down hard like my legs quit. My hands went numb and my thoughts went loud. I didn't want a child, and that truth stayed true. But this still felt like something got taken without asking. Kayla stepped toward me and stopped a few feet away. I was scared you'd blame me, she whispered, eyes locked on mine. I wanted to say I wouldn't, but the words felt risky. She kept going anyway, and I was scared you'd hate me forever. Jess folded her arms and watched me like a referee. I hated her for being there, then hated myself for that. Kayla wiped her cheek fast, like she was embarrassed by tears. And I was scared of what I might do, she added, voice breaking. That last part hit like ice water. What do you mean? I asked, and my voice softened by accident. Kayla stared at the sink like it was safer than my face. I thought about keeping it, she admitted, and my heart kicked. Jess's eyes snapped to Kayla, surprised and worried. Kayla nodded like she was confessing a crime. I thought about not telling you, she whispered. Then she looked at me, because I wanted it for 1 second. I felt anger flare, then crash into shame. I'd made wanting feel dangerous in our house. Kayla saw my face shift and kept talking through tears. Then I hated myself for wanting it, she said, and her voice shook. I clenched my jaw and forced one breath in. You decided fast, I said, trying to sound steady. Kayla shook her head, tiny and honest. No, she whispered, I spiraled for days. Jess moved closer to Kayla and touched her elbow. Kayla didn't flinch this time, she leaned into it. That tiny lean made my chest ache with something sharp. Kayla looked back at me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I stood up slowly, palms open, keeping distance. I would have been there, I said, and heard the pleading. Kayla gave a sad little shake of her head. You would have been there for your fear, she replied, and it stung. Jess's voice cut in, calmer now. He would have panicked, Jess said, not unkind this time. Kayla couldn't survive a debate, she added, eyes steady. I swallowed hard because that word debate sounded too accurate. I rubbed my face and stared at the receipt again. The name looked ugly now, like a stain. You brought another man into it, I said, and my voice cracked. Kayla flinched, then nodded and didn't fight the wording. I called Jess first, Kayla whispered. She couldn't leave, she added and glanced at Jess. So I called him, she finished, eyes down. Jess murmured it was a last resort, and the room stayed tense. I felt two impulses collide inside me. One wanted to punish her for lying. The other wanted to hold her because she looked wrecked. I did neither, which probably looked like cruelty. Kayla took one more step closer and held out her phone. Look, she said, voice trembling. The screen showed a call log with that name on it. My chest tightened as I realized she saved it. You still have his number, I said, too sharp. Kayla's eyes snapped up, anger flashing again. I kept it because he texted me, she snapped, then froze. Jess muttered, oh my God, and Kayla looked panicked. That matters, I said, and my voice went flat. Kayla shook her head fast, like she could erase the slip. He's annoying, she insisted, too fast to sound real. Jess stared at Kayla like she wanted to yank the phone away. I took the phone carefully and scrolled without rushing. There were messages, a lot of them. Not romantic, not clean either. My hands went cold as I read the last one. It said, you good after today, don't tell him. No hearts, no jokes, just a blunt instruction. I looked up at Kayla and she looked like she might faint. Jess's face went hard and I heard her breathe in. Kayla reached for the phone and stopped herself mid-grab. I didn't ask him to say that, she blurted. Jess snapped, why is he comfortable saying that? Kayla's mouth opened, then closed, and she had no answer. I handed the phone back like it burned. Kayla took it with shaking hands and held it to her chest. I wanted control, she whispered, voice raw. And I didn't want you to see how messy I was, she added, eyes pleading. Messy, that word made me laugh, once bitter. This isn't messy, I said, and my voice broke. This is you cutting me out. I finished and my throat tightened. Kayla sobbed once, sharp and loud, then covered her mouth. Jess stepped forward and angled her body toward Kayla. Breathe, she whispered, and Kayla tried. I stood there like a statue because moving felt dangerous. Then Kayla looked at me through tears. Do you want to divorce me? The question hit me like a shove. I didn't answer fast enough and I saw her notice. Jess's eyes narrowed at me, ready to strike. My jaw clenched because I hated being cornered by this. I don't know, I admitted, and the honesty tasted awful. Kayla nodded like she expected that exact answer. She wiped her face and straightened her shoulders. Then I'm leaving tonight, she said, and her voice went steady. Jess blinked, surprised. Kayla, Jess started reaching out. Kayla stepped back from her touch, firm now. No, Kayla said, and her tone shut the room down. I took a step toward Kayla, then stopped. What does leaving mean? I asked, careful. Kayla looked past me toward the front door. It means you don't get to interrogate me anymore, she said, and my chest tightened. She walked to the bedroom and shut the door. Not a slam, just a clean close. Jess stayed in the kitchen and stared at me like I was poison. You pushed her into this, Jess said, voice low. I wanted to argue because that's my reflex. But the messages on her phone kept flashing in my head. My no kids line kept echoing too, ugly and loud. I didn't think I was doing that, I whispered and felt stupid. Jess grabbed her keys from the table and moved toward the hallway. You want to fix anything, she said, pausing at the door. Stop acting like the victim, she added, eyes sharp. Then she disappeared into the bedroom and I stood alone. Minutes passed that felt like hours. I heard drawers open, then close, then open again. No sobbing now, just movement. The lack of sound scared me more than yelling. Kayla walked out carrying a small bag. Her eyes were red but her face was set. She didn't look at me as she walked to the front door. I followed 2 steps behind like a ghost. At the door she finally faced me. I did what I thought you demanded, she said, voice even. And I still lost you, she added, and her mouth trembled. I swallowed hard and couldn't find a clean response. I held out the receipt like an idiot offering evidence. Kayla stared at it, then shook her head slowly. Keep it, she said, and her voice cracked at the end. Then she opened the door and paused on the threshold. Jess came out behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Kayla didn't shrug it off this time, she leaned into it again. That lean felt like the final verdict on my place in her life. Kayla looked at me one last time. Don't call that number. Then she walked out and Jess followed without looking back. I stood there with a receipt in one hand and silence in the other. My phone lit up on the table with an unknown call. The screen kept flashing while the house stayed still.